Robert. Robert. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 1:18 on Friday, March 3, 2023. Welcome to the Media Center here at the Office of the Prime Minister. It's an all teams, all hands on deck media conference being called by Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness as we update the country on a matter that's very, very pressing indeed, the drought situation. With us this afternoon, Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, Senator the Honourable Matthew Samuda, the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, the Honourable Pernell Charles Jr., the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Honourable Audrey Sewell, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and here at the Office of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Marsha Martin-Henry, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, and her CTD, as well as the CTD in the MEGJC. Mr. Michael Williams, representing the Minister of Health, Mr. Mark Barnett from the National Water Commission, Audley Thompson from Rural Water Supply, Mr. Peter Clark from the Water Resources Authority, Mr. Joseph Giles from the National Irrigation Commission, Mr. Evan Thompson from the Met Service. We also have the Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Clifford Blake, and other representatives from the JCF. So as I said, it really is an all-team, all-hands-on-deck meeting to deal with this very, very pressing matter. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start off with Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness with his presentation, and welcome as well to our media representatives here and online.
Thank you, Naomi. It's actually good to be back in the media room and to see journalists face-to-face rather than on Zoom. But to our friends who are joining us by Zoom, good afternoon, including our diaspora, who I know follows our press conferences, and to all Jamaicans listening to us. We've called this press conference to address the current meteorological drought which Jamaica is presently experiencing. Here with us this afternoon are heads of agencies which are representative of our water sector and drought response mechanism. We have, which is in fact our National Drought Management Committee. And this includes the Meteorological Service, the Water Resources Authority, the National Water Commission, the National Irrigation Commission, Rural Water Supply Company, and the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Yes, the JCF is a part of the Drought Management Committee. Now, Jamaica has a bimodal rainfall pattern, which means we have two peaks of high rainfall activities. The primary peak occurs, if I'm not mistaken, in October each year, and the secondary peak occurs in May. Now, during the period February to March and the month of July, that is in between the two peaks, we also have our lowest period of rainfall. So we are in one of those low periods now of rainfall. Sometimes, of course, there are deviations, but generally, this is the pattern. Now, I just want to make some clarification. If you note, when I started, I said that Jamaica is in a meteorological drought. What that means is that the level of rainfall is so low that it is affecting the supply of water. And this is particularly the case for communities that are dependent on catchment, for example. So rural communities are likely to be greatly affected in meteorological drought. But there is a more standard and precise definition of a meteorological drought, and that is determined by what is called the Standardized Precipitation Index. And this is a tool used to monitor drought conditions based on precipitation, meaning rainfall. For Jamaica, a meteorological drought event occurs anytime the SPI, that is the Standard Precipitation Index, is negative for at least 2 consecutive months and reaches certain particular values. And I won't go through what those values are, but suffice to say that we have hit those marks. So the people who are in rural areas who depend on rainwater catchment or have water systems that depend on catchment, they are starting to feel the impact of the drought. So they don't need this index to say that they are in a drought situation. They can feel it. The meteorological drought is different from the hydrological drought, which is focusing on your stream flows, your flows in your rivers, the level of water in your aquifers, and so forth. So we are not yet at that point. So we are not yet experiencing a hydrological drought. However, the starting point of that is when your rainfall is persistently low. So a hydrological drought, well, rather a meteorological drought could cause you to have, or will cause you to have, if it persists, a hydrological drought situation. So the situation is of concern, but it is not one in which I would say we should panic. But we are being proactive, we are preparing the country, and we are trying to bring our citizens into the understanding of the changes that are taking place in our climate and how it will impact your daily lives and your social well-being. So the government, in monitoring, and we always monitor rainfall, noticed that from as early as October last year, we were seeing reductions in our rainfall, and it has since worsened. In November, we had 62% of our 30-year average for rainfall. In December, it declined to 47% of our 30-year average for rainfall. And we are at now, in January, when we have our last figures, 32% of the 30-year average. The figures for February are now being compiled, but the preliminary analysis is showing that we will be probably lower than 30%. So we are, from a meteorological standpoint, from a rainfall standpoint, we are in a crisis. So it is against this backdrop that the Drought Management Committee has commenced meetings, and they started as early as December last year. And Minister Matthew Samuda updated Cabinet on the situation in January. And since then, you may have noticed that, for example, the NWC and the NIC would have started some conservation steps, some conservation measures, and the NWC and your parish councils may have started some initial trucking operations for water. And to that end, we had made an allocation of 50 million Jamaican dollars to support the initial response. I believe we gave 30 million to the parish councils for them to start the initial response. However, this morning, I received another brief which showed that the initial response was not sufficient as the meteorological drought has worsened. And therefore, I am announcing today that we will put in another 100 million Jamaican dollars into the response, and the response will be channeled through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. It will be channeled through the Ministry of Local Government and filtering through the various municipal authorities. We cannot leave out the Ministry of Agriculture. Minister Pernell Charles Jr. is here because the lower rainfalls will have an impact on the agricultural sector. So again, this is another response. Now, in terms of how the resources will be used, we're going to concentrate on the rural areas that are impacted, because we still have sufficient supplies in our catchment and in our treatment facilities and in our reservoirs, even though some of them are showing decline. The utility areas, meaning the areas served largely by the NWC through metered water, they are not affected as badly as the rural areas. And so for this phase of our drought response, we're going to be focusing on the rural parishes, and we will be directing the funds by need. In times gone by, we have just given a general subsidy for water trucking. So, for example, each constituency would have gotten a certain allocation. As this is the initial phase, we're going to go case by case, need by need, so that we maximize the value of the response. In other words, there are some areas that will not need assistance right now, while other areas will need great assistance. So we're being sensitive to that. So yes, MPs will get an allocation through the CDF, but only in the parishes that have been assessed as being in need, so that we can give maximum attention to those areas. And I happen to know that there are some communities that are particularly badly affected. I spoke to Minister Tufton this morning, who brought to my attention his own constituency, where some of his kids were not able to go to school, and other events have been affected. So the effort now will be on giving support as needed, and the focus will be on the rural communities that are affected. Of course, if there is an urban community that is affected, and there may be a few of them who depend on catchments or on water systems that are not part of the NWC's system, they too will get support. The NWC will play a critical role in all of this as well. Now, you may recall that in November last year, we took receipt of 8 new water trucks. So your government has been increasing our capacity to respond to these crises. These 8 trucks are with the NWC, and we have another 8 that we are planning to purchase. Well, we are in the process of purchasing the others. In addition to that, there are some parish councils that we had provided with trucks. We're going to continue to increase our capacity with trucking and the replenishment of the capacity of our rapid response for water. Now, that is not all that we have done. We have invested heavily in putting in an entire new water trunk for the corporate area. We have invested heavily in what we call our non-revenue water reduction, meaning that the NWC now has less leaks than before, and therefore is able to recover more funds from the water it produces. But that leads me to the real purpose of this press conference. Yes, the government has to respond. Yes, the government has to place resources at the disposal of the parish councils and the MPs so that they can pay for trucking to bring water to your communities. But you too, as a Jamaican, you have a duty, a role and a responsibility in how we manage the drought. We all have a duty to conserve on water. The issues of climate change are real. I know for most Jamaicans, that is not a concern with all the other issues that we have to deal with inflation and crime and in wage and other issues that we have to contend with. Sometimes, we hear this high-level talk about climate change. But this is where climate change meets your life. And a part of becoming a resilient country, meaning having the ability to recover quickly from crisis and to survive through crisis, is that we must be prepared. So it's not easy for some people, because to be prepared for a water crisis, you might need to have a tank, you might need to have storage capabilities, catchment capabilities. But I'm appealing to all Jamaicans to be conservative in the use of water. We are not yet at the point where we would declare certain orders in terms of the usage of water, but we could get there. Before we get there, I would urge consumers to, for example, reduce the number of times you wash your car, reduce the amount of water you use in watering your lawns. Make sure that if you're not using the tap, you turn it off. Check your homes for leaks. If you can, start to collect whatever rainwater you can, if we are so blessed to have any rain during this period. But in putting in your water taps, your toilets and so forth, get taps and toilets that are water efficient. So these are the things that we need to do as Jamaicans to become responsive and smart about our climate. So in summary, we are in a drought. It is a meteorological drought. It is already starting to have an impact. The impact is mainly in rural communities. Of course, there are communities that are without water, but that may not be as a result of the drought. The drought is starting to affect the agricultural sector. The government made an initial response in early January, but the situation has deteriorated to the point where we believe we should advise the public so that there can be some behavioral changes to help to mitigate the impact of the drought. The government is putting in more resources. The resources will be targeted to needs. Of course, if it worsens or lasts longer than we expect, then we will come back to the nation, explain a new strategy of how we will assist. If there are questions, I am prepared to take them, but I might very well direct them to Minister Samuda, who has the portfolio brief, and all the other experts who are here who could probably give you more technically sound responses. Thank you very much.
No sound? All right, here we are. We're much better now. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We do have some questions. Prime Minister, would you want to take a presentation from Minister Samuda and Minister Charles on the portfolio ahead of questions? Or I know you have several meetings.
I have several meetings, and that's why I was indicating, without saying I had meetings, that I would direct the questions to ministers. But go ahead, I'll take a few questions.
All right, so let's start off. I think Hal Shane, could you introduce yourself and ask your question, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hal Shane Burke, Radio Jamaica News. We have heard in previous dispensations about efforts to dig wells and to increase catchment facilities and storage. Long term, what are the plans for that?
No, the government continues to use the strategy of expanding its water footprint, production and distribution through wells and catchments. But that is not the long-term solution. The long-term solution really lies in proper planning of where we live and what we build. It lies in a strategic use of the water resource, in who we allow to extract it and what they do with it. It lies in a consumer in getting a kind of water consumer who is conscious of the environment and conscious of the changing climate and will change their consumption behavior to behaviors that are more conservative of water. And it also lies in making what I call nation building and resilient building infrastructure, such as ones that I'm going to announce in my budget presentation.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let's have Maya. Maya, if you could fully identify yourself and your question.
Good afternoon, everybody. Maya Chung, PBCJ. Prime Minister, you referenced we have these 8 trucks. How have they been servicing the issue so far, and how soon are the other 8 that you're moving towards getting going to be arriving? 16 trucks based on a population of 3 million seems to the uneducated a little small. So that's my question.
Well, first, let's accept that 8 trucks are insufficient. So, Minister, I'm going to allow Minister Matthew Samuna time, but just general, 8 trucks are insufficient. But, you know, 8 is a much larger number than 0. So we have made the investment, and think of it this way. No government will keep the reserve of trucks to deliver water. The delivery of water should really be a private sector initiative. What the government keeps is the reserve of cash to pay for it. We keep the reserves of trucks when we need to ensure, for example, that hospitals must get water, the police stations and lockups must get water, the schools must get water, and a distant, very remote community where private truckers may not want to go, the government should be able to reach it. So the reserve of trucks are strategic, which is why we have made the allocation of $100 million to pay for trucking. But your point is valid. 8 trucks are not enough to give the NWC, the parish council, and so a strategic reach. In total, we have how many trucks, Minister? 21. In total, we have 21 trucks, and we are getting 8 more.
Do you know when?
Well, Minister will answer those when he comes. It is a priority, however. It is a priority.
All right, Prime Minister, may I also just take the liberty of acknowledging the presence of Ambassador Rocky Mead, who has also joined us. And your final question from the floor for this afternoon, I'll give to Kalisha. Kalisha, could you properly introduce yourself and question?
Afternoon, Prime Minister. Kalisha Williams
Hi,
from
Kalisha.
Television Jamaica. Okay, so PM, there has been no forecast for a few days recently. I understand that the staff at the Met Service who are stationed at the Norman Mann International Airport, they're upset that they're being moved from that tower to another location which is not suitable for duties. And this is since the NMIA was leased by another company. Can you say what is being done about that? And 2, you mentioned that the focus is on rural areas. Can you see the parishes that are worst affected? Thank you.
Yeah, I will leave the minister who has who have given the portfolio oversight to address the issue. I'm aware of the issue with the Met Office staff at the airport, but I do know that Minister Samuda has a plan in place to address that. In fact, I know that there is a meeting that is convened to address it. As it relates to your other question, just remind me again, it's the parishes that are affected. Let me just look back at my brief. I believe I saw St. Thomas, I saw St. Catherine, I believe, remind me, Minister, which other ones were there? Clarendon, Westmoreland. But Minister Samuda will give you the full listing. Yeah, I did see St. Thomas, St. Catherine, Clarendon, Westmoreland. But it's not, usually it's not the entire parishes, it is, sections of the parish, and we want to be focused on the resources that we have so that it is targeted and reaches the people who actually need it. All right, so thank you very much. I'm actually in the process of preparing my budget presentation, so I'm meeting with heads of agencies. So I ask your pardon to take leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. And as the Prime Minister takes his leave, then may I ask Minister Matthew Samuda to make his presentation, to be followed by Minister Pernell Charles Jr. Minister Samuda.
Thank you, Naomi, and good afternoon, everyone. I will acknowledge that protocol has been observed already. My presentation this afternoon will be brief. I think the Prime Minister would have covered the general nature of the response to the ongoing drought that is coming and is to come from the government going forward. I'd like to focus firstly on the operations of the Drought Management Committee and what persons can expect. The Prime Minister has directed that this Management Committee will meet weekly and provide updates to the Cabinet as it relates to the situation, both as it relates to current rainfall, which we'll be obviously monitoring very closely, but beyond that, the response and the impact on the utilities that manage the distribution. That is usually a quarterly meeting, but it will be taking place on a weekly basis now. Now, this Management Committee is a particularly all-encompassing one. It deals with all of the major distributors, so the NWC, NIC, rural water, your municipal water systems, they are represented in this space. But other stakeholders which are represented, which are not, wouldn't naturally jump to mind, include the JCF. We know that when we distribute water by way of trucks into communities, there can be issues with the social cohesion in that space because people are obviously anxious at that time. So we coordinate very closely with the police so that they're aware of what we're doing and when we're doing it. We also work very closely with the Ministry of Health. It is very important that we monitor the quality of water going into these trucks and we ensure that the trucks are indeed sterilized appropriately. This is something that we'll be coordinating. I've spoken to Minister Tufton. Good to see you, Representative Mr. Williams. We've had issues in the past as a country. I know in 2014 in particular, there were significant issues related to the quality of water that was being trucked. This is something we've been working on from last year. We've looked at the protocols, we've looked at the appropriate sampling mechanism, we've looked at how we license these trucks. The trucks that are licensed and are clear to truck water will have readily identifiable markings on them so that the police can identify whether they should or shouldn't be on the road trucking water. This is something we've actually done a lot of work in anticipation of the seasonal rainfall going forward. But the critical issue is going to be how we communicate with the public. All of the agencies that deal with the water sector, including NIC, if I could be so bold, Minister Charles, will ensure that they open special lines for persons to reach out to highlight problems they're having. Ultimately, whereas we do get calls from the political representatives, the members of parliament, and indeed the councillors, we will need to hear from the public when they've had particular disruptions and when they have not been serviced in an unusually long time. We will be as responsive as is humanly possible. I know the teams at NWC, NIC are going to come under significant pressure, but the teams have been preparing for this from the rainy season. We convened drought management meetings in August and September last year when it wasn't an issue. So we've been preparing for this. This is not a last-minute exercise. The broader point I think that the Prime Minister made is that it is the infrastructure investment that is going to deliver water, potable water, to people's households. The trucking infrastructure is resilience building for emergencies such as this. We will continue to invest in our emergency response, but more importantly, in his budget speech, he will outline significant investments that will build the capacity of the water sector. If there are any, I will take questions at the end because I think we have other presentations, but certainly the country should be assured, or we can rest assured, that all of the stakeholders will be working very closely together to ensure that we do all within our power to reduce the impact of the meteorological drought. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. And of course, yes, we will take questions at the end. We have now a presentation by the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Honorable Colonel Charles Jr.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Minister, colleagues, as it relates to agriculture, this sector is uniquely vulnerable to the impact of severe weather conditions, flooding, droughts, and the negative consequences of climate change. And so we know that billions of dollars have been lost in the last 2 decades in terms of production losses in the sector. And that is why the government, through the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and our agencies, is steadfast in advancing a strategic response to ensure that we can mitigate the fallout from the impact of the drought and any other negative consequence of climate change, particularly when we note that the sector has contributed 7.3% to our GDP, where we have seen 7 quarters of consecutive growth in the sector, and where we know that we have continued our support to farmers of more than $1 billion. So there's a lot for us to protect. That is why you would have heard our Prime Minister speak about the meteorological and the hydrological drought. For us, our concern is the possibility of moving into an agricultural drought, where the focus for us is not just on the rainfall patterns, but more so on the moisture content in our soil, the capacity for our crops to complete their cycle of development. And so, for us, through RADA, NIC, AIC, and other agencies, we have continued to build resilience in the sector with a focus on short, medium, and long-term alleviation. We have so far presented to the tune of $90 million in terms of trucking and other forms of support, and now another $110 million is now being activated to provide support to our farmers across the country. Through the NIC, we have seen canal and pipeline rehabilitation. We have seen the conversion of surface irrigation to pressurized systems, the rehabilitation of wells, the extending of hours where we are pumping water from those wells, the rotation of supply, trucking, the new irrigation systems that are being put in, and very importantly, we have done some water utilization training for our farmers. All of this is important for us to make sure that we're working together to build resilience and to expand and fast-track our efforts to efficiently utilize our water resources, to improve the access to water, and importantly for us in agriculture, to improve irrigation and moisture conservation systems. Through RADA and through AIC and the ministry, we have provided trucking to the tune of at least more than 20 million, and another portion will be coming. Of course, more will be needed, but we know that we can count on Minister Samuda in that regard to give us more support. In addition to trucking, we will be purchasing a 4,000-gallon truck to support our fleet. We will be continuing this support to farmers across the country. We have now 10 completed water harvesting ponds, catchment ponds, 3 more being constructed, and 2 more that will be provided through the support for our Hills to Oceans project. We are also going to be advancing continuous support through provision of seeds to assist farmers in being able to support them throughout the production phases. We will be providing mulch, which is a very important climate adaptation strategy that has been used over the years. And so it's not just about modernized innovation, it's also using the traditional methods that have worked. And so right now we're looking on 50 acres of grass to supply an estimated 100 acres of farmland with support, and that should support more than 300 farmers. In addition to that, we have provided $15.7 million so far in support to our livestock farmers, and that support is provided in terms of black tanks and irrigation equipment. And another 15.7 has already been identified to continue support to our farmers. All of this is in our effort to make sure that we can maintain the positive trends in agriculture. Right now, we are very concerned. We are listening to our farmers in St. Elizabeth and across the country, and we have activated already our immediate response. But it is more important for us to know that a comprehensive long-term response is in place. We are advancing the largest capital investment ever in the Ministry of Agriculture through our irrigation systems in Essex Valley and SPAD and Pedro Plains to come. $4.4 billion is expected to be used this year to drive our irrigation projects towards completion, and that is the way that we'll be going forward in terms of building resilience. As you heard our Prime Minister say, it is not ideal for us to look only to the short term, but we know that we have to do that now. So black tanks, irrigation systems, drip irrigation, catchment ponds, trucking, that's being done. But ultimately, the Essex Valley, SPAD, and other irrigation systems will be our long-term sustainable approach to ensuring that we can provide resilience and sustainability for the sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your presentation and a number of nuggets of information there that I'm sure questions will be asked on. Let's now hear from the National Meteorological Service. Mr. Evan Thompson will do his presentation. Again, this is, as the Prime Minister says, it's a crisis, not a time to panic, but a time to ensure that we do the right things to conserve and get through this period. Evan.
Okay, thank you very much, Naomi, and good afternoon to all of you, ministers in attendance and permanent secretaries also in attendance, heads of ministries, departments, agencies, and of course the media who is in attendance. I just wanted to give a little bit of information as to what is really happening, the dryness, the drought. Sometimes we use the terms interchangeably, but they are really a little bit different. We go through a period of dryness every year, and sometimes it does lead us into drought, which is what we hope does not happen. But my presentation starts with the traditional rainfall pattern that our Prime Minister shared about earlier, the two peaks that exist, but also I wanted to point out that the lowest area in that pattern is really occurring in March. So March is traditionally our driest month of the year. The lowest amounts are at a minimum during the period February to March, and then there is a secondary low period in July, which we don't usually worry too much about because we expect tropical waves and other tropical systems to affect us. So that is what has been the traditional trend. But our recent trend, what we have noticed, I wanted to point out in this next slide, which shows what we've been experiencing since October, November, December, and in January. If you look at this bar chart, the middle portion is really what is occurring at this point in time. It shows the amount of rainfall during this season that we're looking at. The bar at the top of each section, so if we look at October, at the top we'll see what is normal for the month. In the middle you'll see what is happening currently, and then below that you'll see what happened last year at this time. So October, we see that we did have more rainfall than we had last year, but in comparison to what is normal, we still fell short. Going into November, again, we fell short of what is normal, but then we also fell short of what we experienced last year. So the conditions were becoming more on the lower end in comparison to last year. Then moving into December, we see that there is a significant drop in the amount of rainfall that was experienced. Comparing to the norm, again, it's much less than normal, but also comparing to what we experienced last year, significantly less, just about 50% of the rainfall that we got in the 2021 December was experienced in 2022. Then going into January, we see that the relationship between this current year and last year was even more worrisome, because we saw less than 50%, maybe just about 40% of what we experienced last year being experienced this year in January. I don't have shown here, the Prime Minister mentioned earlier that we are just collecting the data for February now that the month has ended. But just a preliminary check from the automatic weather station shows that there are many stations that experience no rainfall during February. There are some that experience some amount of rainfall, but appreciably below what we would have hoped for. And so the condition is most likely much more severe at this point in time than it was at the beginning of February. Looking at the normal year, that's what the picture on the left shows, what the general trend for January would look like. A normal year would see that kind of pattern with some amount of rainfall being experienced in the northeast of the island, the driest period being in the south central, moving toward the southeast of the country. But what you see on the right side is what we actually experienced in 2023. And you see it's a lot more oranges and browns than would have been seen normally. So clearly you can see just by a snapshot that we are in a much more severe situation than we would normally be seeing. So for January 2023, 12 of our, I'm saying 13 parishes because we consider Kingston and St. Andrew as one parish in this case. For January, 12 of our 13 parish areas recorded below normal rainfall, with percentages between 8 and 72 of their 30-year monthly means. Only St. Elizabeth recorded above normal rainfall in January. Every other parish saw less than norm. Moving to the dryness index, this gives a little indication. The Prime Minister pointed out what we look at in terms of the standardized precipitation index. This is what this is referring to. So we see on these bars the various parishes of the island and how much rainfall was actually experienced over a 2-month period, which is what we use to assess our drought. Westmoreland, we're seeing minus 1.25 is the index. St. Elizabeth, as I said, the only one that got more than norm, experienced a 0.21, so it was on the wetter side in that month. And then Manchester, minus 0.38, Clarendon, minus 1.14, and going right across, we see the lines moving across show what kind of dryness we've been experiencing. And exceptional dryness is at the lowest end of our scale. We see where St. Thomas, Portland, and St. Mary all were classified as being exceptionally dry during the month of February. This is after we assessed December and January together. Extremely dry conditions were assessed also for St. Anne. And then we had moderately dry conditions being experienced in Westmoreland, in Clarendon, in St. Catherine, in Kingston and St. Andrew, also Trelawney, St. James, and Hanover. Manchester, although on the dry side of the scale, had not reached any of those thresholds. So it was considered abnormally dry, but not reaching moderate or severe. So looking at the drought conditions now in the next slide, the current drought is depicted in this picture. There were 11 parishes experiencing meteorological drought, 11 of our 13 conditions during the December 22 to January 23 bi-monthly period. So the list is there: Westmoreland, Clarendon, St. Catherine, Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Thomas, Portland, St. Mary, St. Anne, Trelawney, St. James, and Hanover. The projection, I guess that's where we want to go next. Are we expecting any rain right now? You know that the secondary peak that the Prime Minister mentioned really occurs in May. So generally we go through the driest month of the year, March. Then we go through April, where we start to gear up for receiving some rainfall. We may get some spells of rainfall, but not sufficiently significant to create a change in the pattern. So we're really not expecting significant change before May. But the projection is that for the 3-month period, February to April, rainfall is expected to remain below normal to near normal. And this is by looking at the prediction tools that we have at our disposal. So below normal to near normal rainfall across the island for the remainder of the dry season through March, and ahead of the transition to the early wet season in April. Temperatures over the same period are expected to be near normal to above normal. And the reason I put this in is because that is a threat to agricultural interests, in particular because with the higher temperatures you have more evapotranspiration taking place, drier soils, and so the agricultural drought is even more likely than it is at this time. So that is what we are expecting. That basically is where I bring my presentation to an end. Unfortunately, not really great news. We really just have to do, as the Prime Minister mentioned, conserve and make sure that we plug the leaks and use our water very conservatively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your presentation. Now we will hear from Mr. Mark Barnett, the Managing Director of the National Water Commission. Mark?
Considering all protocols observed, good afternoon, everyone. Coming after Evan is really a challenge. But just to give a little synopsis, I don't know, am I going to be able to move these, Naomi? So just a little bit of synopsis in terms of what has been happening at the NWC. So we may, first we look at the systems that we have. Overall, we operate over 1,000 water facilities. And most of them are surface sources that we operate. So obviously, with any changes in meteorological conditions, those sources become impacted almost immediately. And, it covers a gamut of storage tanks, pumping stations, and the number of customers. And the number of customers really just speaks to the amount of accounts, but it doesn't speak to the population. So we usually multiply what we have by about 4. So it gives you an idea of over 2 million plus people would be affected and be served by the NWC in its service areas. Normally, our production is just about 160 million imperial gallons up to 190, and it all depends. And currently, our utility service areas is just about 88%. I guess, it's a little bit different from what the Prime Minister would have spoken about, especially rural communities. And those rural communities are invariable places that NWC does not have a distribution network or even operate a system. But just bring you home a little bit closer, because oftentimes when there's the onset of drought or there's a drought, the first question is what is happening with our storage, etc., etc. And this gives a synopsis of, over the years, how hermitage would have fluctuated, especially during this time. So it is not strange for us during this longest dry period, which I think it's, for us in NWC, we consider it starting the 1st of December until the end of May, thereabout. So you're talking about 6 months, just about, in terms of dry period. The bright, I want to say red, I know the ladies may consider that a different color, but I want to say red. That's where we are now in storage capacity at Hermitage, which is about 50% of the 400 million imperial gallons that is old. If we look at the next slide with Mona, and we would have been a little bit different at Mona because Mona operates with other systems functioning. We are just about 60% in terms of store capacity. We are reducing now, when I last checked, just by 1.5% on a daily basis in terms of reduction. So we are fair in terms of managing that storage much better. The bottom line in all of this is NWC can function adequate in the corporate area with an input volume of 28 imperial million gallons per day. It simply means people will have a little bit of disruption, but not significant disruptions. Where we go below that, then that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging. This just gives a visual of current situation at Mona, and I believe you should see Hermitage soon thereafter. And again, Hermitage is a little bit different. It's a function of those stream flows that goes into Hermitage. So you will ask the question, have more storage, but your streams are not that reliable to support a larger investment in storage at Hermitage. So the question, therefore, that would be asked is, what is it that we're doing as an enterprise? And a number of things has to be tackled in solving water supply issues, in ensuring that we bring resiliency in our water infrastructure. It is not just one singular thing. A number of things, and I could just list a few of them. Some of the immediate stuff, as would be shown here on the graph, is during the time of plenty, when we don't need to operate some of our wells, we rest them. Now they're fully functional. Avondale, Beverly Hills, Cavaliers, and we're putting in back Montgomery Corner. You may be wondering, where is Montgomery Corner? But this is just at Crossroads, where the public health office is. There's NWC as a well station there. There is also Hampstead, which is close on the eastern side of the city. We are also doing work there. And that is just particular for Kingston. But with all of that, we have to fix the network. And part of fixing the network is the investment that we would have done over the last 7 years. So we spent about $1.5 billion replacing the transmission main from Ferry all the way to South Camp Road. We have also done the NRW work within the corporate area. All of that has resulted in over 26% reduction in losses in the network. So you'll ask the question, why do that work as opposed to storage, as opposed to a new facility? The maths and the economics is simple. If I have a network that is losing 60% plus of what I put in the network, it stands to argue that you have to fix that network. Because whatever new capacity you add to that network, you're going to lose 60% of it anyway. And then you question the value of that investment and its effectiveness to your solution, if you will. So we see it as a major undertaking as part of ensuring that our water resources are effectively and efficiently utilized, and where we actually have a more positive impact on our environment. So if we don't need to pump more water or extract more water, we won't. And we will have better use, if you will, of those aquifers. So that is part of it. We are doing and will be pursuing the Rycobury. I don't know, Minister, if you want to speak on that, but probably since I have the floor, I may just mention it. You would also realize for a number of years, you would have heard me spoke about a new investment in new water treatment facility. And I'll just use a minute just to explain, if you will, why we choose the Rycobury as opposed another location, additional storage. When we assess the situation, the last bathymetric analysis that was done on both Mona and Hermitage Reservoir, Mona came out as having a 10% siltation. And that is when you use radar to scan the surface, the floor of the reservoir. Hermitage, on the other hand, had a siltation of 27%. Now, the cost to remove the silt, that was estimated at over 20 plus million US. We make an assessment of the additional capacity that the 27% would represent. And the performance of those river sources, invariably you're going to have at least 5–10% siltation added every time you have heavy showers. So it's a continuous investment that would be required to keep that siltation down. On the other hand, when we look at a source close by, Rycobury in this instance, at the time, the driest stream flow, or the stream flow in the driest period, was about 48 million gallons per day. It's a natural storage. So it's a location where we can have adequate abstraction to supply the needs of the corporate area, while at the same time manage the value of that investment that you make. So the decision was taken to pursue a project which we have now negotiated and signed off on the water purchase agreement. It's going to be done through a public-private partnership arrangement, and it is our intention, based on where we are, to break ground in May. That construction is expected to be around about 20 months, and so we should be seeing improved water supply in the tune of 15 imperial, and I use the word imperial specifically, because oftentimes we use US gallons as opposed to the old British system. But this one is the old British. 15 imperial million gallons of water to be produced, distributed into existing transmission main to serve the corporate area. It will see additional water going into Spanish Town and Portmore. Our projection is that investment should alleviate any issues as we now experience, at least for the next 20, 25 years, based on the rate of population growth that we would have assessed and compared that with. And other things that we're doing island-wide is to pursue a whole non-revenue water that tackles the entire island. NWC loses a significant amount of its water per day. And the water that we lose is sufficient, even in the time of drought, to adequately serve the population that are now affected. So it's a worthwhile investment. You would have currently, for Portmore, where we now have a NRW activity going on, we are seeing in the first year of actual work a 10% reduction in losses. It also allows us to reduce our energy costs, because NRW, more losses, higher energy costs. And so we are now seeing 30% reduction in our energy bill and the carbon footprint. We can speak to that, Minister, and we soon probably can sell carbon credit because of these work. And these are some of the activities that we believe are important to impact sustainable water supply, and it's not just any one solution. I would also hasten to add that oftentimes the corporate area ball most, but we want to also state that part of the solution as well is a complete soaring of the city of Kingston, and that will allow us at least another 4 or 5 million gallons of groundwater that we could access to improve service. I'm sure the groundwater we would have to do some flushing of the system because of what obtained over the years, but nonetheless, it's a resource that is there and could be utilized. I'm just going to leave this last slide just to give, it's really a compound, list by list, if you will, of some of the things that we would have done and are doing in relation to our overall long-term strategy to drought management and improve water resources, water supply to our population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Barnett. That was very comprehensive, and we pray for rain as well as conserve. All right, so let's have members of the media then who are both online. I'm looking at the online reps as well as those who are here. If you have any questions of Ministers Samuda and Charles Jr., as well as anyone from the Drought Management Committee and those from the water resources areas and, of course, NWC. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I'll let you have the mic and you can ask the questions. Any further questions? All right, I see two. All right, let's go with Maya first.
I had a gentleman been told by the PM that we would get a schedule on the reserve trucks that are coming. You want to take the mic? Or, yeah. Over what period?
So the 21 trucks that the NWC currently owns are deployed in the field and working around the clock as citizens would expect. The procurement process is underway, and we expect that the delivery should be sometime later this year. When we would have had delays in ordering last year because of supply chain issues, but that is not likely to be the case this year. So the process is underway. Later in the year, the trucks will be delivered. This is a further 8.
Hang on, Maya, so that they can hear you.
So, sir, Minister, we have 21 and we're adding 8.
Correct.
Thanks. Yeah, okay then.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, Talisha?
Okay, thank you, Naomi. The Prime Minister had said you would have answered my first question in regards to what's happening at the Met Service. There has been no forecast for a few days now, in regards to what's happening at the Norman Manor International Airport. Some persons are upset at the Met Service that the tower is being moved from that location to somewhere that's not suitable for their duties. What's happening?
So it's not just the staff at the Met Service that is upset. I'm having toured and visited and met with the staff. I'm particularly upset at the issues that they're facing. It's unacceptable, but there are meetings scheduled to resolve the issues with the airport operators and indeed with the airport's authority. And as soon as it is resolved, we will bring the nation up to date.
All right, thank you so much, Minister. Any other questions from members of the media present here with us in the Media Center or online? All right, thank you so much, Ministers, Minister Samuda, Minister Charles Jr., representatives of government agencies, and of course our permanent secretaries who have remained with us. It's really been a wonderful afternoon. Again, the main thing, please conserve, conserve, conserve. We are going through a dry spell bordering on now full-blown drought. And so we ask you once again to conserve. Thank you so much. Happy Jamaica Day. And we'll see you once again at our next press briefing.